Lori gripped her arms. I'm surprised he didn't snap much sooner. And for Bobby, Carol hummed as she tried to come up with an idea. You'll likely just have to wing it, but don't leave anything up to chance and just be honest to him. And Lori nodded, her stomach welling up with uncertainty, as she hadn't had a clue on how to approach her ex. And with that said, we should really get started on our project. Carol fumbled with the digital clock on the oven. 2 hours is fine, but this thing is due at the end of the week. Presentably, having spent a few hours at Carol's place, with the two working until they felt like they made some decent progress on their project, Lori left for home as she knew it was close to dinner time. Sadly, her prediction came true. Lincoln acquired more information about how the argument intentionally started. Lori cast with no blame towards Lenny, as if she wasn't the one to lie. She was pleased to know that Lincoln managed to work up some courage to come to Lenny at all. This wasn't without a consequence, however, seeing as Lincoln was filled with contempt towards his eldest sibling. Even now, with everything including Lincoln himself at the table, anytime their gazes crossed paths, the boy would glare at her briefly before focusing on his meal. Over one seating position remained the same as yesterday, sandwiched in between Lily and Lynn, while remaining a seat away from Rita. Over time, Lori went over from eating slow to a mood displaced to try and barely picking at her food. Her thought process was jammed on how to approach her brother when it was clear that he didn't want anything to do with her. Okay, Lincoln knows I started the argument, which eventually led to him being afraid of us, but Lenny did tell him that it was her idea about days ending with the Y issue, and after she did tell him about her condition, the eldest sibling prodded some meat on her plate with the fork, barely exerting any force of the silverware, penetrated the skin so she could lift it in her mouth. I still doubt Lincoln would stay upset at Lenny for any reason. Even the time he pretended that she didn't exist only lasted almost a week. As she slowly chewed her food, maybe if I tell him everything, he might not be too upset. Lori then shook her head. Dang it, I can't do that. He might just think I'm trying to score brownie points on him. Lori stole a glance at her brother, who thankfully had been too busy eating to notice. He gave a side glance at Lily as she giggled while being fed by her mother, who was making airplane noises as she guided the spoon into the infant's mouth. But if I do tell him that why I became a bossy sister, he might understand. I know Lenny did, and maybe Lynn managed to get through to him on her own problems too. But the last thing I want is to make him feel like I'm trying to force him to listen. She prodded her own food again until she captured another piece and stuck it into her mouth. I could also let him come to me whenever he's ready, like he did with Lenny. Lori realized that she might have been staring at him for too long as Lincoln's gaze swung back in her direction. She quickly averted and looking back at her plate, but barely she noticed him glaring at her again through her upper handle, or he'll just never want to speak to me again, even when I leave for college, and not talking to him might convince him I don't really care about him. I wouldn't be surprised if he brought up the moments where I said something what seemed to be cold, but didn't realize it at the time. When she was no longer that, he was staring at her. Lori glanced up towards him. His eyebrows were still furrowed with irritation, as he was almost done eating. Lori then sighed to herself. He's going to be mad either way, even when I talk to him. Same goes for Bobby. Her fingers tightened a little around the fork's handle. I need to start somewhere, she muttered to herself. With this in mind, Lori figured the best way she might be able to talk with Lincoln would be shortly before he went to sleep, and stood now. He was still keen on using the bathroom before any of his siblings could do to avoid confronting everyone. He had already finished the rest and excused himself from the table. All she had to do was wait and hope he had calmed enough to grant her a few minutes. So Lori waited. Normally she'd be one of the first siblings to use the bathroom to take care of her evening duties. Instead, she waited until all of them went except for herself. Lenny asked why, and she roommate gave the half-truth of what she heard from that day and couldn't afford to wait. And once she had used the bathroom herself, Lori went slower than usual that she'd come out, and she was certain everyone else would have already retired to bed. Although the lukewarm water she was greeted with was a minor irritation, a price to pay in some grand scheme of things. Once Lori was finished and was dressed in her PJs, she gingerly opened the bathroom door. Not a soul was in the hall. All of them had closed doors with muffled talking resonating out of the twins' and Lynn and Lucy's room. The only source of light illuminating the hallway was from the bathroom. Lori breathed in. "Here it goes, nothing," she muttered to herself, shutting off the light. Similar to Lincoln, she avoided stepping on certain floorboards that had been under the carpet that would give an audible creak. She approached a converted linen closet. None of the rooms had opened up. Good, she wanted to know this task alone anyway. Raising a hand, the eldest sibling gave a few light knocks. Lori then heard a small gasp of breath on the other side, making her stomach twitch and worry. A couple of footsteps were heard before the door had been pulled back, ever so slightly. A head with white hair, curious eye was visible enough through the opening. That same narrowed eyelids as the eyebrow curved down. "What do you want, Lori?" Lincoln spoke evenly, but did a little to hide his true feelings. Can we talk for a minute?" Lori asked, wriggling them at the shirt as a means for comfort. Lori bit his cheek. Lincoln had a bit of cheek. Lori, I've already had a very long conversation with two sisters today, and I'm not in the mood for another one when I'm going to sleep soon." He started to close the door. "And you're the last person I want to talk to." "Wait!" she called out, a little too loud for her liking. On instinct, she moved back towards her and stuck her hand through the doorway to prevent it from closing, but stopped herself right when her fingers were an inch away. Either way, Lincoln paused in his movement. "It will only take a few minutes, I promise." Lincoln could have sworn that his sister would have attempted to barge his way into the room, like she had numerous times before. She went making a big fuss over him, entering hers whatever by accident, or if he needed something. In the latter, Lori was reluctant to help unless it was something specific she could get behind, like girls' advice. The middle child had every inclination to give some well-deserved payback for those moments, but the way she talked it made it feel like she was pleading with him. "Where I have seen that before. Oh yeah, when they needed me and my help or whatever, that dumb activity they wanted to do, and leave me short-handed." Lincoln thought only bitterly. He stared at Lori's face, which now looked as something akin to a child looking at their parent for permission after they had been yelled at recently. Giving a sigh, "Fine, but only for a few minutes." The 11-year-old stepped back as he pulled the front door open further, letting Lori into a small space. Unsurprisingly, Lincoln was already dressed in his bed at hair. The room was only illuminated with the desktop lamp, which Lori saw it had a few sheets of paper sitting under a circle of light. A few pencil-made pictures were visible. When did Lincoln start drawing?" "Okay, you said you wanted to talk." Lincoln sat on his chair folding his arms. "So what is it?" "Well," Lori dragged out, unsure how to start. "How have you been?" "Peachy," Lincoln replied in a chilly tone. "Is that all?" "No," Lori replied, knowing that she needed to get to the point. "I'm guessing you know about how the protocol started?" Lincoln furrowed his brows. "Gee, I wonder what gave that away." He sat up straight in the seat. "So let me ask you something, Lori, or a few things actually. On the weekend of that stupid protocol started, when did you take Lenny to the mall with you?" "No," Lori scratched the back of her head. "I know she wanted to go super early, like 9 in the morning. Don't get me wrong, I plan on going later, but I'm not in the rush to head there that early on the weekend." She frowned, with it gripping her shirt tighter. "I didn't even think Lenny had a good reason either." "Probably because you didn't have anything she could do for you in exchange for the ride," Lincoln muttered. "No, I just didn't," Lori started. "Did you run into Lenny like any time you were at the mall?" Lincoln asked, interrupting his older sister. "No, I don't think. And Lenny did have that stupid dress on the time when you got home and showed her other sisters what you brought." Lori felt a twinge of anger, being erupted twice, but it was subdued due to the sheer guilt filling in her chest as Lincoln kept pouring out the questions, tilting her head down in shame. "Yes, but for some reason, you just had to be the only person in the house to own that dress? You and Lenny could have just lived without having the same clothes." Lincoln started, no longer hiding the represented anger. "Heck, Lenny probably had a different size than you did, and if you were worried about grabbing the same wrong clothes, I'm pretty sure you would have just checked the tag, and what you did, you would buy that dress for anyway. Lori paused, averting her gaze. I can't remember. I think I had bought it for a date with Bobby later on, and obviously your boyfriend is much more important than your siblings. The boy's arms then dropped to his sides in tight fists. Like that time you didn't even bother apologizing when you puked on me from getting car sick, then sent a picture to him? Oh, and somehow Bobby is aware of the protocol, and no one said a word about to their own brother? Lincoln ranted, his voice raising as he got angrier. Lori raised her hands in a defensive position. Lincoln, I know we messed up on that, but I didn't think things would go out of control like that. Of course you didn't, because you guys were too dumb to realize how dumb your system was from the start, and I'm surprised you didn't have a bigger part in planning it, considering how much of a control freak you are, Lincoln stated, pointing an accusing finger at her. Lori pursed her lips. Yes, I know I may have my moments, but... Lincoln gave her a dry chuckle. Moments? As soon as Mom and Dad go on a date, you gone on a massive power trip, and it doesn't stop there either. He got up from his seat. You make all of us do your chores or your homework just to give us free rides, instead of just doing it from your heart, if you still have one. You made Lenny fail her driving test one time when she was close to passing because you wanted to keep that kind of power over us. Just because of that, you refused to drive us to school because Bobby wouldn't wear a suit you picked out. And because of that, most of us were late to school, and I had a perfectly good project ruined. And on that note, that was when the last time you taught Lenny how to drive. Lori flinched under the accusations. In spite of everything, nearly fell 3 feet taller than her brother. She felt a small under his glare and rants, and he wasn't so finished yet with his trade. As far as her driving lessons with Lenny, she knew the answer for that, and Lincoln should too. She wasn't allowed to use the van for the purpose unless one of their parents were present, given how Lenny crashed into a neighbor's pool last time. For his part, Lincoln's tried to keep his rage under control, but confirming that he believed to have happened over the dress started making everything spill out before he can even stop himself. And now he wasn't even sure if he wanted to stop. You still got a better A afterwards we helped out, though, the teen pointed out in a whisper. That's besides the point, Lori, and now is given an A- thanks to Luann, the boy growled. I'll get to her later. But with you, Lori, I don't even know what caused you to act like you hardly care about us, of her just being tools for you to use. Especially me. He started counting his fingers. You made me act as a footstool so you can just get a ride to the comics book store, and you and the rest of your sisters couldn't let me decide on my own where we wanted to go for a weekend. That one time, none of us felt like you had ever some peace and quiet to read without getting interrupted, and decided to prank me so I can learn something about not ignoring my siblings. Yet you do a great job on giving yourself how given you are constantly glued to your phone. You burst into my room whenever you want, kick me out of your room, which is also Lenny's room, and if I have put so much as a foot in there, you guys have the nerve to make my room for your stupid protocol? Lori didn't say anything, heeding Carol's advice to let him drain his anger, although she hoped he'd stop soon. A quick glance back to remind her that his door was still open, letting his loud voice spill into the hall. And for that matter, you always act like I'll ruin something whenever I put a plan into frickin' motion. Sure you remember Mom and Dad's last anniversary? Or the grocery store incident? Or when the toilet got clogged and I said I didn't do it? Or the chocolate that I was going to bake into pies for a school project? Lincoln glared coldly at her, making Lori shift uncomfortably. Actually, for your information, my plans do work well. Not all the time, but most of the time. They just fail because my sisters keep ruining it, especially if it's something I want to get on my own. He then folded his arms again. It's not my own fault you guys are slow thinkers. Lori's eyes twitched a little. She couldn't have felt upset, as it was true, but it still rather felt irritating to be given the euphemism for stupid. The eldest sibling sighed. Lincoln, and now that I think of it, Lincoln continued, ignoring her almost entirely, I am pretty sure your control freaks was a part of your relationship with Bobby. It seemed a little weird how easily he gave you an answer what you wanted. Lori furrowed her brows, knowing that wasn't true. Lincoln. And you did obsess over him, given how often you ignored the rest of us, while you would have spent all day texting him, or using for a ton of devices to talk to each other when your phone was good enough. You hardly cared about, maybe I like Bobby as an older brother, and just want to hang out with him, but instead you drive Clyde into it and try to steal Bobby back, only just after a few days. It's not like no one is allowed to be near him besides you. How selfish is that? Lincoln railed on. At least my tutor came along, and you started obsessing over him. You didn't act like, or didn't even care, that I could have failed 5th grade when you and the rest of my sisters and Dad chased him off. And I don't think I even know what Bobby would have thought hearing him almost cheated on him. Lori narrowed her eyes as her hands began to turn to fists. Lincoln, if you were going to do that, I might have just held my ground and not go on that double date just for you two to get back together. I mean, how was I supposed to know Ronnie Ann was his sister? She did pull a couple pranks on me that week, and if he had a problem with it, he could have just come to me instead of dragging me into something I didn't want to do again. Lincoln rambled on. In fact, Ronnie Ann told me about how you guys got together. He narrowed his eyes at his oldest sibling, seemingly unfazed by the stink eye and tight-lipped face he was getting. Knowing how dense Bobby can be, and knowing how the rivalry you have with Carol, I'm starting to think you got together with him just so you could... Lori tried to keep herself calm, but she had to endure it, as much as it hurt to hear the truth. Most of what Lincoln said had been true about controlling nature, how her actions and consequences, even though she wasn't primarily the cause of the problem for most incidents. He was even right, even though he didn't know it. But about her initial reasoning for hooking up with Bobby. But then he stared to insinuate of how she really liked him, and that was just all means it end the same way. Lincoln was just implying with her family. A nerve broke inside her. The fact that Lincoln was going on and on, it wasn't helping her either. As she felt her anger reaching a tipping point, wanting him to shut up, Lori grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and hoisted him up to her eye level. Listen up here, you little twerp, Lori spoke out quiet, yet caustic tone. I loved Bobby with all my heart and soul, and the same goes for my family. I just love him in a different way. That's why I had to break up with him, just not only for his sake, because I fucked up my relationship with you. I want to fix it. You're no angel either, but don't you dare assume that I've cared about nothing but myself since I was born. Yes, I'll admit I've used my post as the eldest sibling to do crappy things, but I already realized that, and I want to do better for you and my siblings, but not sisters. But you don't dare lie to me and say you just don't enjoy hooking up with Ronnie Ann. The eldest sibling finished, breathing so loudly to her nose when she finished. A second later, her anger suddenly disappeared, realizing what she was doing. She still had Lincoln to her grip, his feet swinging fitfully in the air as she tried to find solid ground. Any hints of a bit of rage had been lost since Lori stared at her in shock and terror. His pupils were shrunken down as tears appeared from the corner of his eyes. His breathing was uneven, and he gripped the part of his shirt clutched in her hand. Listening closely, Lori could feel a faint whimpering emitted from his throat. Slowly, Lori lowered him until his feet were back on the ground, then released his shirt. No sooner than she did, Lincoln stepped back. Unfortunately, his body was uncoordinated, and his legs felt wobbly, making him fall on his butt only a couple of steps. Lincoln, Lori stated, I didn't mean to. But please, Lincoln spoke in a broken voice, scooting away from her. Leave me alone. He moved on to his knees and crawled back to his chair, trying to use it as a makeshift barrier. Lori got up closer. Lincoln, just go away! The boy squeaked out. A shaky sniffle echoed around the room. Knowing she blew her chance, Lori's arms fell to the sides. She probably ruined whatever progress Lincoln was making in approaching his sisters on his own. Her stomach twisted at the idea of being the one to cause Lincoln even more, considering moving back to McBride's. Still, she wanted Lincoln to at least know why she's been this selfish, and as they both knew she would act. It might have been salvaged to whatever bonds might have been getting fixed. You're probably not going to believe me if I was to tell you, but I changed into how you see me because, Lori pierced her lips, because I broke under the pressure of living under to take care of everyone for so long. You saw how hard it was for you guys locked me in my room for one night. I still remember the times we played at the park when I fed you your first ice cream, and when we used to play video games together. You may have not believed it, but I introduced you to comics. We played video games, and she used to read me comics? Lincoln thought to himself. But when middle school started, I wasn't very a popular girl. I had been targeted because of my looks, Lori continued, lightly brushing some of her hair with her hand. And on top of having to babysit for a constantly growing family, I couldn't take it anymore. Lori gripped her sleeves. I ended up putting my social status above my siblings, pushed you guys away, grew stricter, and you were right. I didn't initially hook up with Bobby just so I could say I have a boyfriend. Lincoln grew eye-wide as he wiped away a tear. He had been saying many things in his rant, but didn't actually think apart what was really true. But over time I did grow to actually liking him and got obsessive about it, Lori continued. But you have every reason to be mad at me. It's my fault about that protocol started. My fault got you prompted to help desire despite not being told to, and my fault it led to you. She paused, choosing her next words wisely. Getting badly beaten up, everything up to now. She then started to back out of her room. I literally am the worst sister ever. Lori didn't say anything more as she turned her heel and walked out. Lincoln then stayed in his position until Lori opened the door to her room and walked in. Then he did move closer to the door. When he did, he noticed a few pairs of eyes staring back at him through the cracked doorways. Lincoln decided to try and ignore what he closed his door. The boy then slumped to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest as he sat there in silence. That talk was a perfect reminder as to why he was cautious of speaking with his oldest sisters. Lori took him by surprise and a perfect opportunity to slam him onto the floor. He was surprised that she only chatted with him with his own words and let him go. At the same time, she admitted why she became so selfish, honestly a bit of a bitch. Recalling the time she ruled the house coup against Lori, his other siblings didn't even seem to listen to him after the Queen of No was dealt with. Maybe Lori had tried to be reasonable back then, but the constant disrespect forced her in the position she didn't want to do. But what other selfish moments? Maybe she just felt like she couldn't relax and had been controlling over something bad would happen. Lincoln lifted his head, looking at the clock on his nightstand. It was almost midnight. Sighing, he stood up and turned off his desk lamp. He considered whether he should block his door with his chair again, but his mind felt too numb to make a decision. The boy fell face first onto his bed a moment later. When Lori got to her room, she wasn't all that surprised to find Lenny next door. Lincoln's shouting would have woke up Mr. Grouse if he had been any louder. Trudging past her roommate, Lori flipped the face first onto her bed. "Lori?" the fashionista asked in concern. "What did he do to you?" She knew she made a mistake. Lori should have taken no for an answer and tried another time. She pressed the issue to got the tongue lashing evidently couldn't handle. Now she doubted Lincoln would trust her at all. Only the positive part was she managed to lay out the truth for him to hear. But she broke the unspoken rule of physically confronting her brother. The eldest sibling's only reply was a restless sleep, claimed her was, "I screwed up."